A marsh in Argentina, dawn. Capybaras at the water's edge. For 30 years, scientists worked to bring this wetland back to life. Jaguars returned. Giant anteaters returned. It became one of the world's great conservation success stories. And then researchers discovered that the animal holding part of the ecosystem together wasn't the jaguar. It was the one nobody had been paying attention to. Argentina's Iberá wetlands cover 13,000 square kilometers, second largest freshwater system in South America. When biologist Sofia Heinonen first flew over it in the early 90s, she looked down and saw, almost entirely, cattle. She would later describe it as a magnificent theater, with almost no actors. The actors had been removed. Jaguars gone for over 70 years, giant anteaters too. What looked like pristine wilderness was, underneath, a stage that had been cleared. So rewilding Argentina brought them back, one by one, over decades. Each reintroduction was an event: cameras, press, the first jaguar prints in Iberá mud since before World War II. Ranchers pushed back. Conservation teams negotiated. There were confrontations, setbacks, a lot of very slow bureaucratic work between the headlines. The story had a shape people understood. Take out the predators, things go wrong, put them back, things go right. It's a clean story. Conservation likes clean stories. Funders like clean stories. A jaguar crossing a lagoon is a photograph. A photograph moves people. People move money. There's a problem with clean stories. They answer the question you asked. They don't notice the question you didn't. Go back further. Before the jaguars. Before the cameras. Before the rewilding program existed. Through most of the 20th century, capybaras in Argentina were hunted for their hides. The leather went to manufacturers. The meat was a byproduct. Nobody was asking what the animals did. They were a resource, a line in a ledger. And the only number that mattered was how many you could take. Hunting pressure fell unevenly across the landscape. Some areas were left alone. Others got hammered for decades. And that unevenness, which nobody designed, which just fell out of history, gave scientists something they almost never get: an accidental experiment. In the early 1990s, a biologist named Rubén Quintana drove out to 10 wetland sites across the region. Some had been protected. Others had been hunted continuously. He counted capybaras along the banks, one head at a time, kilometer by kilometer. The kind of field work that involves a lot of sitting in a boat in the heat, watching the water. Protected lagoons, around 31 animals per kilometer of shoreline. Moderately hunted areas, roughly 11. Heavily hunted, 1. Not twice as few, 30 times fewer. The number read like a typo. Quintana published. The data went into the literature. It was read as a conservation story with a clean moral. Stop hunting, numbers recover. Good news, full stop. Nobody, including Quintana, was asking whether those numbers connected to anything happening in the marsh itself. The plants, the soil, the structure of the place. Whether the animals were doing something or just living there. Conservation science in the 1990s was still largely organized around species counts. You tracked populations. You measured what went up when pressure came off. The question of ecological function, what an animal actually does to the system around it, was a harder question and a less funded one, and it required a different kind of patience. So the data sat, a strong result, clearly important, waiting for someone to ask the next question. That would take another 30 years, and it would come from an unexpected direction. Here's the thing about wetland science. The most important dynamics are often the most boring to watch. A jaguar crossing a lagoon is a photograph. Capybaras grazing on a muddy bank, 50 of them, doing more or less the same thing, is not. So when the Iberá population climbed to roughly 50 individuals per square kilometer, and researchers were focused on predator reintroduction. The capybaras were just there. Background: furniture. One group of scientists decided to establish a baseline before the jaguar reintroduction was complete. They wanted to know what the vegetation looked like before a predator started changing animal behavior. A before reading. So they set up enclosures. 10 wire fences, each 3 by 3 meters, placed in the short grass grazing areas near the water's edge. Next to each one, an identical open control plot. Same site, same soil, same grass. The only difference was what could get inside. Before they interpreted anything, they needed to know who was actually using those open plots. So they set up camera traps and counted every animal that appeared. Iberá has around a dozen large herbivore species: marsh deer, pampas deer, several others. From all animals captured on camera at the open plots, capybaras made up 94%, 56 visits per day on average. Nearly everything happening on those plots, one animal was doing. Inside the fences, without capybaras, the grass grew. By year 2, vegetation outside the wire sat around 10 centimeters tall. Inside, past 50. Biomass had more than doubled. On paper, that sounds like abundance. It looked like abundance: thick, tall, green. And here is where the data stops being intuitive. More grass did not mean healthier. The total number of plant species on each plot barely changed. But that number is misleading, because a different measurement had shifted dramatically. The evenness of species distribution had fallen by half inside the enclosures. One grass, Andropogon, was taking over. A plant community where dozens of species had shared space more or less equally had collapsed into dense, single-species stands. Remove the capybaras for 2 years, and that patch of wetland lost its internal balance. Outside the wire, where grazing continued, short, varied, mixed, a mosaic. The mechanism, once you see it, is almost embarrassingly simple. Any grassland has dominant species, aggressive growers that, given the chance, shoot upward, intercept light, and crowd out everything below. Capybaras preferentially eat young, low shoots. They move widely. In doing so, they constantly trim back the potential aggressors before those plants can pull ahead. The light reaches the slower growers. Dozens of species hold their ground. Ecologists had seen this pattern before. In Africa, where massive herds of wildebeest and zebra maintain what researchers call grazing lawns, patches of close-cropped, species-rich vegetation sustained purely by large-scale grazing. For a long time, it was considered largely an African phenomenon, something that required enormous numbers of enormous animals. Here was one species doing it in South America. There's a longer story behind that, and it goes back much further than commercial hunting. South America once supported a megafauna: giant ground sloths, glyptodonts, multiple species of large grazers spread across the landscape, shapes and sizes that don't exist anymore. During the late Pleistocene, roughly 10 to 12,000 years ago, the continent lost around 82% of its large mammals. The causes are still debated: climate shifts, early human hunting pressure, probably both at once. What isn't debated is the scale. Most of the animals that could have maintained these grasslands simply disappeared within a geologically brief window. The capybara survived. It was smaller than many of its contemporaries. Semi-aquatic, adaptable, able to shift diet and habitat in ways the big specialists couldn't. And for 10,000 years, while the continent's grasslands waited for grazers that never came back, the capybara kept doing what it had always done: trimming the shoots, moving across the floodplain, keeping the aggressive grasses from taking over. Not because it evolved to fill a vacancy — evolution doesn't work on a schedule — but because it was there, and it ate. And the landscape reflected that every single day. The load that once would have been distributed across a whole guild of large herbivores had somewhere along the way landed on one animal. For 10 millennia, more or less quietly, while the continent built cities and ran cattle and hunted everything it could find. That said, and this matters, the enclosures in this study were placed specifically on the elevated short grass patches that capybaras use for grazing. That's a minority of Iberá's total area. The taller vegetation zones were outside the study's scope. Capybara's role there may be different, may be negligible, nobody knows yet. So this is not a claim about one species holding an entire wetland together. It's narrower than that, and narrower is still extraordinary. In the specific zone where anyone actually looked, one animal was doing far more than anyone had suspected. The reserve boundary is not a wall the animals understand. Outside the protected zone, in the buffer areas around Iberá, the 20th century continues. Ranchers there aren't villains. This needs to be said plainly, because the easy version of this story wants a villain. Capybaras and cattle eat, essentially, the same thing. For a farmer with a pasture and debt, a population of capybaras near the floodplain is direct competition for forage. The economic pressure is real. It doesn't come from malice. It comes from people protecting their livelihoods the way their parents did, and their parents before them. And so, in the buffer zones, capybaras are still harvested. No regulation extends protection there. A proposal to expand the protected area exists. It was drafted. It was reviewed. It hasn't been approved. The science and the policy are living in different time zones. One moves in papers and peer review, the other moves in political cycles and land negotiations, and the grinding pace of things that require someone to give something up. The study published. The boundary stayed where it was. Inside the reserve, Quintana's 1993 numbers look like a healthy population. Tens of animals per kilometer of bank. The vegetation mosaic intact. Past the fence line, where harvesting continues, the counts drop toward the lower end of his range. The same dynamics he described 30 years ago. We now know what those dynamics cost ecologically. They continue anyway. There's one more thing the study can't answer yet. The enclosures were placed as a before reading. Before the Jaguar reintroduction was complete, before predators began changing where capybaras felt safe grazing. Once jaguars establish themselves fully and start pushing capybaras toward the water's edge, the grazing lawns further from the marsh may begin reverting on their own. The whole reserve becomes a version of the experiment, at landscape scale, without any wire fence. What that does to vegetation diversity across Iberá, nobody knows. The data doesn't exist. 30 years of restoration. Jaguars back. Anteaters back. A real conservation success story, internationally recognized. And somewhere in year 30, a group of researchers set up 10 wire fences in a small corner of the reserve and found out what had been happening the whole time. The jaguar got the cameras. The capybara was just there, 56 times a day, every day, keeping a portion of the marsh from becoming a monoculture. Quintana noticed something was off back in 1993. The numbers were stark. But the question of what the animals were for, that one sat in the literature for 3 decades without anyone picking it up. Maybe that's the part worth sitting with. We track the rare ones, the photogenic ones, the ones that make good documentary footage, the ordinary animal, the common one, the one your eye slides past. Almost nobody asks what it does. And by the time someone sets up the wire fence and actually checks, enough time has passed that you're not restoring something. You're just measuring what you lost. How many ecosystems are being held together right now by something nobody has thought to study? How many have we already broken? Not through malice, just by not asking the question in time. Past the fence line, outside the reserve, in the places no enclosure has ever been placed. The answer is still out there. We just haven't built the fence yet.